Welcome to Measuring the Impact of Customer Experience, brought to you by the teams at ComOps and B2C Solutions. I'm Robert. I'm the CEO of ComOps. At ComOps, we help support hospitality operators better understand the sentiment of their guests. Before launching ComOps, I led commercial strategy teams for Seminole Hard Rock Support Services and Seminole Gaming. I've also worked with some other leading casino operators like Caesars Entertainment and Penn National Gaming. Ben Radley, can you share a little bit about your experience?
Hi, everyone. My name is Radley Medina. I'm currently an independent consultant and executive advisor to casinos and hospitality companies. Prior to doing this, I have worked with Caesars Entertainment and across 3 different stints in senior leadership roles, both with property level and at corporate. Worked for Station Casinos, helped open the Cosmopolitan in Las Vegas as a director of excellence. And I also did a couple roles for the service companies, most recently as president of operations and chief revenue officer. The bulk of my career, though, has been spent in the world of CX and operational excellence. So I'm excited about this topic.
Great. My name is Ben. I am a VP and co-founder here at B2C Solutions. We work with hotels and resorts and tribal casinos. And the idea is that we work to fill various needs in their operations. So hotels and resorts get from A to B doing something really well. There's a reason that they're successful. And then often there's some sort of outside skill that they need to bring in to be able to accelerate their success, elevate their mindset, and deliver results. So we often do all kinds of different, very specific projects that are designed to fill a need that's unique to each of the clients. Prior to that, started at the Venetian in Palazzo in hotel operations and got my master's from UNLV at that time. And then worked at a whole bunch of different travel enterprises, spent a little bit of time at Marriott International. And now I work exclusively in B2C Solutions. So that's me. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Radley. I feel incredibly lucky to be on this webinar with both of you. It's been wonderful getting to know more about the roles and the impacts you've made. The amount of experience, breadth, and depth that you two bring to this topic is absolutely tremendous. Thanks for joining us today. Our agenda today is broken into 3 sections, and then we'll leave time at the end for questions and answers. First, our panel will outline why CX matters. We'll then transition into a case study of how one particular operator found return on investment from using an active listening program. And really by doing this, by leveraging a traditional survey program. And then we'll discuss how you can create a business case for implementing or enhancing your CX program investment. Radley, why don't you walk us through why CX matters?
Thank you, sir. We'd be happy to do. So a deliberate focus and execution of CX or a customer experience program is no longer a nice to have. Now, when CX as a discipline was new, it often sat in marketing or HR, but it's no longer just about brand polish and kind of superficial work. It's not about just performance management or even satisfaction scores. CX done right is about managing expectations, economics, talent, and accountability. This is why more and more companies now have a CXO in their C-suite. So I'm going to take you through like the 4 main categories or main reasons for why CX matters. The first is that guests expect seamless journeys. Expectations are shaped by the best experience that somebody has, not just with you, not just at your competitors, but just broadly as they go through life. Their expectations are shaped by the best experience that they have. So guests just don't compare you against direct competitors, as I mentioned. They compare you against theme parks, cineplexes, malls, even against digital spaces like Amazon. So increasingly, as they have experiences with some of the world's best brands and companies, friction is becoming less and less tolerable, because as the world gets better at removing friction from the customer experience, the more discerning a customer is going to be when they go to your property. And long wait times matter more than ever. A lack of in-the-moment accountability matters more than ever. Inconsistent execution is particularly a dissatisfier for a lot of folks. CX today needs to be about deliberate design and orchestration of the entire guest journey from point A to point Z. What some folks don't understand is that point A often takes place before they even step foot on property. It takes place when they're interacting with your website, when they see an email come through their inbox, or when they see an ad somewhere else. Maybe if you do print ads and magazines, that's when their journey really does begin. So CX today is about the deliberate design and orchestration of the entire guest journey. So when journeys are seamless and guest effort is low, guests will trust you. And that's an important thing, because trust is really the key currency, if you will, in your relationship and ability to deepen that and strengthen that relationship with your guests. Expectations, though, never remain stagnant. In past life, there's a saying, what exceeds expectations today will become expected tomorrow, right? So you continuously have to get better. So as you and your competitors get better, expectations, as I mentioned, will continue to climb. And so as they do, you might feel this economic pressure that you need to invest more in CX, that, this is an environment, the economic environment will often pushes in the opposite direction of what you feel it should be doing. So that transitions then to the next thing. Why does CX matter? Margin pressure nowadays is real. Customer experience is not just about spending more, though. It's about spending smarter. And one of the main things about this webinar is showing you how you can measure the return on experience, right? What's the CX ROI? Why is margin pressure real? It's no secret that labor costs are up. If you compare today's wages with the wages from 5 years ago, in some cases, you're looking at 2x. Labor costs are up. The cost of virtually all inputs are up. And in this kind of environment, this kind of expense environment, CX, in my opinion, is the margin expansion driver and not a cost center, right? Because poor CX creates rework, meaning that you often incur more labor hours, higher payroll expenses. There are more complaints that occur, right? So you have higher service recovery costs. And importantly, customer churn increases. So there's higher acquisition costs related to replacing the lost customer base. And so these are all margin destroyers. Great CX reduces the cost to serve and reduces all these negative things I just mentioned. The strongest operators use CX to protect margin while improving outcomes, not trade one for the other. Often the cost of not investing in CX exceeds the cost of investing in it, if that makes sense. And we have some real world examples to show you about that. None of this works, though, if you don't have the right people in the right places at the right time. And so that brings me to the third of the 4 circles here. Talent scarcity changes the game. So CX and EX, employee experience, are inseparable. One has a direct impact on the other. Talent nowadays is harder to attract, retain, and employers are more selective than ever in terms of who they want to work for. So the employee experience have the same frictions, if you will, that the guest experience does. Broken processes, unclear expectations, and not being able to do what they want to do or need to do for their jobs. And when EX is poor, CX suffers directly. So no amount of training or pizza parties can overcome poor design and broken systems. The reality is frontline teams are limited by the systems that we as leaders design. So we need to be deliberate and intentional about those systems. Increasingly, leadership, in fact, and the boards they report to are asking one specific question, which brings me to the last thing on the slide. The boards want proof that CX drives financial outcomes. At the end of the day, CX must be measurable and causal and tied to results. You need to be able to prove it. So boards want to know how CX specifically moves revenue, margin, retention, lifetime value of your customer. Answering these questions requires connecting CX signals, CX results that you get through your survey and review sites, to operational and financial data. So if you haven't taken that step yet, it's something I would strongly encourage you to do, because it's going to be the lever that you need to pull when you want to ask for more resources to invest in your CX program. Those who do it don't just talk about CX as a philosophy, by the way, they manage it as a performance system. Because a lot of times CX is just a poster on the board, a survey in your customer's inbox, and a report that you produce. It's not an actual performance system. And again, the companies that do it put together the right systems to manage. You need to be able to say at the end of the day, if we pull this CX lever, I can promise you within a certain margin of error that this is what's going to happen financially. So again, the question isn't whether or not CX matters. It does. That's a train that's already gone. It's whether it's being managed intentionally or if it's being left to chance. So I'll pause there.
All right, there's a lot to unpack there. Thanks for walking us through that. We did get one question about why the board wants proof, so I appreciate you taking an extra moment to walk us through that. I got to tell you, there's just one thing that I learned when you spoke a little bit about the guest expectations. At ComOps, we support a number of clients that have destination type properties, and we support a number of organizations that are in the regional markets. So it's interesting to see how different the guest expectations are. It almost appears that they're more forgiving for a destination than they are for a high frequency market, where their expectations continue to get elevated after each visit. So thanks for walking us through that. Ben, anything to add?
Yeah, one of the things I see a lot with clients is that you also, when you have a really well-designed CX program, can segment out your expectations, because different types of customers have really different expectations. And I see a lot with our hotel clients where they're let's say a 60% database driven occupancy and 40% retail. And that maybe shifts from different times a year or time of week. And there's this high level of reliance a lot of times in marketing on what do the database customers want? What does the PD customer want? And that matters. It matters a lot. But when you don't have a well-designed understanding of your survey program and your data, you often miss what your next generation of customers, what your new customers are saying that they don't like or don't maybe love about your property. And this shows up like a good example. I have one example just comes to mind about, I had a client was looking at streaming TVs. They focus grouped it through their traditional database. That wasn't super important because their gaming customer wasn't all about that, right? This was a 60% retail business. And it was consistently brought up that the TV system, there were like 10 channels, I think, at this particular hotel. And they were your traditional ones that people wanted. And it was consistently a detractor. Without a well-designed CX program, you're going to only hear the voices that you ask, and you're going to miss those segments of your business that actually are part of the entire revenue picture. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And just one last thing to add before we transition to a real case study. Ben Radley and I, we all come directly from the property market operations. And I think one thing that we would consistently share the same viewpoint on was that the people that choose to work in hospitality, they want to serve. Like, we are in for hospitality. It's a tough gig. And as such, it's really nice to be able, as a hospitality leader or as a direct employee, to know how we're actually doing. So by having an active listening program and capturing more signals of what our customers are actually feeling and their sentiment towards our brand, it's a nice barometer to actually give us some degree of satisfaction as employees of hospitality organizations. It makes us feel good, which motivates us to continue to elevate what we bring to the table. Ben, you've prepared a case study for us. Do you want to walk us through that?
Yeah. So this was a regional property, high frequency, that had tried everything. So they were seeing very surface level, which is a way a lot of people engage with their surveys, right? So very surface level, they were seeing a reduction in friendly, helpful scores at check-in, right? And their check-in scores were low. They tried a lot of things prior to this. So they were like, we did service training, we've done coaching. We don't understand why the hotel is just detached and continues to get these low scores. And what we were able to do using the data is be able to do some text analytics. And if you noticed, right, as we dug into those comments that were, the front desk agent wasn't as helpful as I wanted them to be, really underlying them were all around a sense of timeliness in terms of room availability. And that text analytics, which was an AI-driven tool that's available in the survey package that they were using, we were then able to pivot and say, okay, so we're having a lot of room availability issues. And then we looked over at their housekeeping survey scores. And the housekeepers, if you did comment analytics on it, you saw some of the things. This is the employee engagement survey. You saw also that there was this high dissatisfaction with unpredictable hours and having to stay late and all of these things. And we were able to measure through the PMS that there was an enormous amount of queue rooms waiting for arrival late in the day. So we're like, okay, so the root cause to solve isn't actually a guest service training. It's not, we got to go talk to these people about how they're friendly, helpful. People are seeing it as friendly, helpful because they're like, I want to check in. The front desk agent saying, no, there's not a room ready. That's not helpful. So when numerically on the survey, they're marking them down on that score. We also didn't have a readiness question, which might be a little bit of a survey design issue there. So we were able to dig in and use a different tool. We worked through a Lean Six Sigma project to identify where the variation was, because we found that there was a lot of variation. The credit for detached from the amount of turn time that was related to the room size. And we're able to identify like a lot of different factors. Some of them as simple as we identified really that it was in the room stripping and departures that there were some issues. And then we were able to better create processes around how we handled, for instance, the house attendant handoff to the room attendant to get the room in process. In the sake of trying to move the story forward, though, we were able to actually reduce the room turn times by a sizable measure. So we actually took our average room clean time 14 minutes down in the process of that particular project. Now, project wasn't necessarily a survey project, but it was born in the data, right? So like that project would have never happened as a high priority focus without this understanding that our guests are saying, hey, these things on our survey, these employees are saying this on their survey. We layer those two things together. We were able to take action and make a 14-minute reduction. Now, 14 minutes sounds okay, 14 minutes, but on a cost basis at this particular property, that was actually a $5.33 per occupied room reduction in costs, because those 14 minutes almost entirely eliminated the overtime. And in this particular market, they had to pay overtime over 8 hours. So all of those late turns were costing them overtime because it was based on the credit allotments that were given in the rooms. I bring that whole picture to light because it also raised, with our next pulse survey on the team experience score in housekeeping, substantially increased. They felt seen, heard, and valued because we were digging into the thing that was causing them friction and pain, which was they didn't want to stay late either. And they didn't want to have unpredictable schedules. And the guest satisfaction, friendly, helpful scores at the hotel actually went up 10%, which is pretty substantial change just by getting people into rooms on their first ask. When it comes to just on the cost side, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in depth, but we were able to actually calculate a pure ROI because we took a data-driven approach to solving the problem. We knew that 14 minutes, we knew the $533 per occupied room. We were able to translate that into a $261,000 a year savings. But then in addition to that, we were able to drive additional cleans on our early outs. So we were getting rooms done on time. People were departing early. We were dropping those rooms at this particular hotel. So we picked up in a regional market. This isn't uncommon. There's a lot of early outs because people are like, oh, I booked 2 nights, but I live like an hour away. I'm going to go home. I lost too much, whatever happened, right? So we were able to pick up 3% occupancy just on getting sold out nights that were sold out with dropped rooms, getting those rooms reoccupied, particularly on weekends. And it was all born in guest experience data. And without that AI-driven text analytics, because it's hard to get the feel for the comments when you have thousands of them, you're able to say, okay, timeliness is the issue. It's not friendly. They're not friendly, but they're not friendly about it. Without that beginning, we wouldn't have been able to launch the right project, to get the right result, to make the right impact. So super proud of that project. It was a really fun journey. I love it when lots of things layer together, because that's how you can have really high impact return on your work, is when you're able to say, I want to improve the team experience, I want to improve the guest experience, and I want to improve the financial return. When you can layer all three of those, that's magic, man. And it was super fun. I'm happy to share it. It was a project that I enjoyed being a part of. So.
I just want to make sure I heard all those numbers right. So what I heard is you reduced costs. You reduced the cost per occupied room by over $5, which is pretty meaningful, right? And then you also increased revenue by having more rooms available.
The 3% occupancy gain. So it wasn't an insignificant gain. I believe it equated to more than the cost savings and revenue gain.
That's incredible. As somebody that's a revenue manager in one of my priors, like being able to pick up 3% occupancy just by understanding customer sentiment, no extra direct mail or building new occupancy, that's a big deal. So that's wonderful.
And one thing, Robert, I want to highlight there that a lot of revenue managers don't remember this operational role is those dropped rooms on those peak nights. That's where that came from. Was often in your hotel, if you're a revenue manager and you're not paying attention to those, those are gold, because housekeeping was dropping these rooms on Saturdays and Fridays and other big nights because they were swamped trying to clean the other rooms, and they would just drop them out. So in a lot of cases, they leave them in the system and run the comp, but they know the guest is gone. And they do that because they can't clean them and they don't want to show the occupancy vacant. But this is the understanding of bringing all these layers together, because that was where we picked it up. It wasn't like we grew another random Tuesday that way. We grew it through those early departures.
One thing I wanted to mention, you mentioned survey design and friendly, helpful, Ben, earlier in this segment. I do want to mention that it's important when you're writing your survey not to combine things like friendly and helpful in one question. because then when you get your quantitative results, it's going to be hard without the text analytics, if you will, if you don't have that capability to truly understand what's driving that score. When you write your survey, don't combine disparate things into one question. Try to be specific about it to improve your analytics.
That's a good insight. Yeah.
So before we transition on to some other considerations of how an active listening program creates ROI, I just want to kind of note and run with something you said, Ben, was about creating team member satisfaction. As hospitality leaders, we know how big that turnover cost really is. It's one of those hidden costs. Everything from the cost of searching for a new team member, the training of a new team member, the lost productivity, it's real. And based on my understanding, what some of the leading experts say is that this cost could be anywhere between 40 to 70% of that team member's salary. So in hospitality, it's not uncommon for turnover to already be 50, 60, 70% at the front line. So for an organization that has about 400 team members, if their existing turnover is about 50%, if you could reduce that turnover by 50% more, it could save you almost $4 million annually. That assumes that your frontline team members making about $35,000 a year. So there's real money in understanding team member sentiment. And as you fix the team member sentiment, the customer sentiment typically follows. We know that. So it's always great to focus on the customer, but looking at the team is a huge opportunity as well.
Yeah,
all right.
Customer experience, and this is something I say all the time to clients, is the customer experience will never be greater than the employee experience. In hotels, getting it right in housekeeping is the difference between a disaster and having a really run operation. Housekeeping will make or break your ability to do so many things. And that employee experience, that's where you can win on turnover, because a loyal housekeeper will be an amazing asset if they're really happy. And they will cause you all kinds of pain if your housekeeping department isn't dialed in and doing well. So,
no doubt. All right, Radley, there were some other considerations you wanted to share with the team. You want to walk us through these?
As I mentioned earlier, when thinking about CX design and management, you really need to look at the entire guest journey. And the journey doesn't begin when they first step foot on property. It begins before that, right? When they receive a piece of mail, physical mail in their mailbox, email in their inbox, when they see some digital or television ads, things of that nature. So the first thing I want to talk about is marketing, right? So when thinking about the journey, even with something that's as behind the scenes as search engine optimization and what your team does in terms of the keywords it programs into your optimization algorithm or your coding, you got to think about it from the guest perspective. When they're searching for things online, what are they going to be looking for? What are their needs or desires at that point in the journey? And factor that into your SEO design. That also has a direct impact, if you will, on retention and acquisition. Specifically, though, when it comes to marketing, I want to speak about online reputation. So everyone's familiar with things like TripAdvisor and hotels.com, Expedia.com, Yelp, Google reviews, things of that nature. It's important to know that lots of studies are being conducted to understand the impact of review scores on revenue and metrics that matter at hotels and casinos. I'm going to reference one specific one conducted by Cornell Research in partnership with Review Pro, GRI, back in 2012. It was updated in 2016. What they were able to find is that for every 1% improvement in review scores, for instance, on Google reviews or Expedia or TripAdvisor, hotels were able to drive almost 1% of additional ADR. They're almost able to drive 0.6% additional occupancy and 1.5% of additional RevPAR. Of course, that's just hotel-specific metrics. And that's why it's so important to focus not only on the experience on the ground that's felt, but from a marketing perspective, responding to review scores and review feedback on review sites. Team member recognition is also absolutely important, as Ben mentioned. I love that saying, by the way. CX is only going to be ever as high as EX. One of the most important parts of the employee experience, in my opinion, is the customer experience, and vice versa. One of the most important parts of the customer experience from a leader's perspective is the employee experience. And so when it comes to the team member experience and specifically recognition, it needs to be a deliberate part of your day. There's a video, I don't have a link to it now, but you can search for it on YouTube, where I think it's Steve Wynn presenting at some conference talking about the power of storytelling, and specifically of storytelling with respect to recognizing team members for what they did for their guests. It's a very powerful thing. If you notice at Win and Encore, was that the more people told stories about the great things team members were doing, the more they got recognized, the team members, the more those behaviors were replicated by other people. It's less the importance of team member recognition. And when it comes to player development, one of the things that I think PD executives need to be more cognizant of is all the holistic experience that their players go through. Like a lot of hosts and a lot of player development executives are great in the moment and managing the individual relationship, but aren't necessarily plugged in to the whole experience that their players are having while on site. And the more plugged in they are to that, the deeper the relationship can be with their players if they take a proactive approach to acknowledging issues that may have happened and taking a personal hand and making sure that service recovery is executed. So I was going to turn it over and see if you guys had anything else you wanted to add.
Yeah, I can't emphasize enough about kind of two themes on this slide. The first one is SEO. As more and more consumers start using AI, large language models, and agentic AI search to actually influence and ultimately purchase travel, being able to stand out is going to be critical. And part of being able to stand out is finding ways to amplify that positive guest feedback and working with a platform that allows you to do that. And then I always find it shocking that the 80-20 rule, we talk about it all the time. We work with a ton of casino organizations. It's especially true in those organizations that 80% of their revenue is coming from that small group of customers that are represented by someone in the player development or host team. Being able to share insights of what their team members are doing gives that leader the ability to have an additional touch point, additional conversation, something that's relevant and appealing, but makes their guest feel special, which absolutely is going to drive increased loyalty and ultimately more revenue and earnings growth. We've got some organizations that look at even at a higher level where the CMO, the SVP of casino marketing, wants to know which group of hosted customers are the most satisfied. That player development leader plays a major role in the guest satisfaction at any property. So anyways, there's a ton that we can unlock. We work with some software that does power those type of insights, but certainly thanks for walking us through that, Radley. Ben, anything to add?
Yeah, I want to jump off this team member recognition. So you'll see a lot of surveys, they ask you, as their team member went above and beyond, you put a name in. One of the things that you can actually do that I'm super big fan of, and some of the big hotel chains do this, is you can actually link the field of who checked in your guest to the survey as a field. And it's a lot more reliable the more that you can link up on when your survey is sent out, the true operators who are doing things in your operation. And then you can run a report and say, how did my front desk do over the last 90 days by agent? And when you get down to that level, it allows you to unlock really cool recognition, competitions, strategies that just aren't there if you wait for people to remember the name of the person that they talk to. Now, I'm not suggesting that you never ask about names, because there's people that you're not going to be able to do that. But if you're not doing that for your front desk today, where you're linking the check-in agent to your survey, you're missing a huge opportunity to elevate the team member experience, because they want to know how they're doing. So you can say, hey, Sue, you're like number one, 90% NPS versus 80 for the property job. And that's really meaningful.
What I've done in my past life as well is, if, for instance, that somebody did a respondent to your survey ate at the cafe because they provided a score for your cafe, right? You should be able to tell some places when they were there, what date they were there, and therefore, who was on staff, right? You can highlight teams, you can highlight individual servers that way in restaurants. Same thing on the casino floor. If you know where your player gamed on the floor and what time, day of week and time of day, who was on staff in that particular section, whether it's a casino beverage server or slot attendant. And so you can highlight teams or even individual employees if you have that level of granularity in your data.
Yeah, I think what we're talking about here is really combining that operational, financial, and marketing data into one platform. And we see a number of our customers doing that. We've got tremendous success there, being able to match up how long was the actual wait time for a slot jackpot payout versus what the perceived wait time was, and who was the actual team member that serviced that. In the interest of time, I'm going to flash forward so we can talk a little bit about building the business case.
Yeah. So in my story, I brought up a lot of these different levers, but revenue can be gained by understanding the things that drive people to want to be your customer. And when you understand the things that you could improve on for those folks, they're going to be more loyal and spend more money. But there's also revenue gained in kind of these secret little things that people just don't think about. And in my story, I think it's in my case study, I think the early outs was a great example, right? There's revenue there that you're leaving on the table, but you're not actually thinking about. So the key here is to layer and have all of the brain of the customer experience and the ops data all in the same wheelhouse, so you can layer in and understand all of those impacts. Reduction in cost. I want to push back on the idea that I hear a lot from operators. You hear the speech in the C-suites that we can reduce costs and not impact, but operators often don't believe that you can reduce costs and not impact the customer experience. And in the case study that I brought forward today, I did that intentionally because the housekeepers were actually happier not leaving at 6 and 7 o'clock at night. So we were actually saving money, not at the cost of the operation. We were saving it by doing what we needed to do better. And it wasn't at the expense. Not all cost savings mean we're going to cut the quality. I really want to have operators hear that, because I hear a lot from director of rooms and hotel directors that, oh, it's just about cost savings. We're going to cut more. And it's not about reducing or eroding experience through getting rid of something. It's about doing things smarter and making decisions that lead to better outcomes, both from a financial and guest experience. And when you do things better and you make better decisions, you reduce risk, the risk of turnover, the risk that is affiliated with losing customers to competitors or losing trips. And there are lots of savings to be materially had in that bucket too.
Thanks, Ben, for walking us through that. I'll just share one of my observations, and this was while I was supporting a global hospitality leader. They had casinos, restaurants, cafes, and hotels. One thing was consistent. What we found was that guests that migrated from what we call passive customers to promoters, they visited more. They stayed longer, and I call it velocity of their spend. So either they had larger purchases or larger bets, or they made more purchases or more bets per hour. So they visited more, they stayed longer, and they spent more per hour while they were there. All improvement. And one thing that we also found was that if there's a customer that's a detractor, oftentimes the pearl wasn't worth the dime. What I mean by that is that you could spend a lot of money trying to get a detractor to be a promoter, make them happy, have them become an advocate of your brand. Oftentimes the cost associated with that, especially on the mid-level customers or on the lower level customers, there isn't ROI. So being able to have a program where you're able to identify who are your promoters, who are your passive, who are your detractors, allows you to really focus your attention of trying to keep your promoters satisfied, they're your advocates, and moving those passive customers up to be a promoter. And at the same time, use the money that you were going to spend trying to get a detractor to be happy. Use it for something else.
Oh, I want to piggyback off that, because one of the things too is if you look in your data for places that someone is a passive on a line of business and a promoter in a different line of business. So let's say you have a promoter who gives your cafe a 9 or a 10, but they're giving your hotel consistently 6 and 7s. That right there is someone that you can get additional wallet share from on the hospitality spend, because maybe they're avoiding staying with you as often as they could, or you're losing. Also looking at the whole picture of their survey. How are they ranking you, not just on that top line score? Maybe they're a promoter overall, but what is your waterfall down as you go through your operation, and drilling in on those customers and then taking time to drill into their feedback is going to help you make really high impact decisions, because those people, they don't hate you and they're winnable. And usually there's a strong ROI when there's a gap between how they're rating different elements of your operation.
Yeah, Robert, I do have a few things to add, just to piggyback on what you were saying. At Caesars Entertainment ages ago, we conducted a study involving the entire data set of players and the responses. And to the point you made about passives becoming promoters, what we found was that the passives became promoters in that particular model. With that movement from to promoter came an incremental increase in ADT of 12%, which for Caesars Entertainment was significant. What the database size was at that time, the kind of global theoretical was at that time, a 12% lift in terms of moving passive promoters is very material. right? At the Cosmopolitan in Las Vegas, we use qualitative CX data, so verbatims and comments using text analytics to identify common failures in the experience. And so we use that information to correct those failures. And in doing so, we were able to see a 71% decrease in the number of service recoveries issued. And on a monthly basis, we're able to reduce service recovery costs by about $47,000 a month, annualized to more than $500,000, just by leveraging subjective qualitative data from the CX survey. And at Station Casinos, like any gaming organization, share of wallet, share of trip, something that Ben talked about, is and was very important. And we conducted a study there using a data set of decliners, as well as those who, what we called incliners, people who spent more or visited more frequently year over year, compared those two disparate sets. And what we learned was that decliners as a group showed approximately 25% reduction in both types of share of wallet, share of trips, just because the experience wasn't great. Whereas people who were promoters, they were at the very least flat in terms of productivity, meaning gambling spend and visits, or they actually increased both of those things.
Thanks for walking us through that. All right, I think before we move on to the next slide, I just want to emphasize you don't need to do this by yourself. So at the tail end of this presentation, we'll have a link to all of our bios and ways to get a hold of us. If you're curious about how you could build the business case for your teams, any of us would be happy to help. All right, so just to summarize our focus for today, we talked about why CX matters. Guests expect seamless journeys, and the expectations they have are not actually set by their last visit at our organization. They are set by their journeys at all organizations, whether it's their experience with Netflix, Nordstrom, Costco, another hotel or casino. That all influences what a customer's expectations are. And I also learned that the orchestration of those guest journeys starts well before the customer actually gets to our physical address, right? Maybe they're interacting with the contact center, the website, or maybe they're off on a third-party channel like Booking.com or Expedia, where we have even less control of the customer experience. So we talked a little bit why CX matters. Ben, you walked us through an excellent case study. And I think what I walked away with is that without a robust CX program, you're left with really surface level insights. And with the more robust program, you're getting AI-powered text analytics. And we know that AI gives us speed. And really what we're talking about there is speed to action. And solving problems quickly generates incremental earnings, ultimately creating that sustainable change that we're all looking for. I thought it was awesome the way you articulated that you were actually able to pull $5 out of your CPOR or cost per occupied room, all while finding essentially 3 points of additional occupancy. We're talking about not just the cost savings, but also that revenue growth, which is a big deal. And then we wrapped up with building the business case. I think we found that when this is done right, we can increase revenue, we can decrease costs, and we can help to mitigate risk. So I know we spent a little bit of time talking about how to identify where guests are in their life cycle, whether they're a detractor, a passive, or promoter. That's really important in the decision that you make in your next and best action for that customer. We actually have a lot of questions, but before I transition to questions, Ben or Radley, anything that I might have missed over? Okay. All right, let's transition to questions, measuring the impact of customer experience. Let me pull up. We've got a lot, actually. If we don't get to all of them, I'll make sure that we share our information. You can shoot us a text or an email. All right. So Ben, what is the process you took to get the labor cost savings for the work you did after the learning gap? I know you started to unpack. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'm also a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt. So we measured the process before and after, and we looked at overtime as one of our key measurables, as well as rooms per minute. So the process wasn't capable of meeting the standard prior to the work, and then it was capable after. But essentially is then that OT piece where we were able to reduce that to 0, which was the goal, and do that at a Six Sigma level. So it was very predictable. I think it might actually have been a 3 Sigma level, but it's still relatively predictable at a 3 Sigma level. So that was how I measured it. And we did that. We pivoted from the data to a Lean Six Sigma project because I felt like that was a good way to be able to measure this going in and going out, knowing that we would have to make some changes. The main change that we made was we discovered that the room stripping was the weakness. The house attendants would strip into a bin. The bin would get pushed down to the laundry chute. The bin would be emptied down the laundry chute. Then we had a house attendant downstairs taking the laundry into another bin and taking that bin to the opposite side of the property to laundry because the laundry had moved. It was in that transportation waste that we actually were able to realize 7 of that 14 minutes by coming up with, okay, the bin you strip the room just goes down to laundry down the elevator instead of down the chute because the laundry moved since the chute was built. So just to give you insights there where it came from.
The next question, I guess I'll get us started here, is which CX metrics actually move the needle for executive reporting? I'll tell you, we got in a lot of, I don't want to call them arguments, but discussions, is should we ask the customer if they're satisfied, or should we stick with, how are you going to promote our business, the net promoter score? So we did a lot of testing about this. This is arguably the most important question. And we actually have some clients that only ask that question on their surveys. What we found is that there's actually no statistical difference. So we partnered with a leading university in the Midwest and their marketing department. They went through, I don't even know how many terabytes worth of data, but we found there was no statistical difference between overall satisfaction questions versus net promoter score questions. So I think if you're going to ask one question, you might want to highlight either a net promoter score or an OSAP question. Bradley, Ben, what other questions and CX metrics? I know effort. I don't know if either one of you spent much time on effort. Bradley, it looks like you got something on.
Yeah, I actually spoke about effort at a CX conference several years ago. I think it's an underutilized question on surveys, and not just for the customer experience, but also for the employee experience. It's also important to have a conditional question as a follow-up to that, as you generally do for the likelihood to recommend question, to give respondents the capability to provide color behind the rating. Basically what it is, at the end of the day, all the right things are going to happen for your business if you can make it as easy as possible for your customers to have the kind of experience that they want to have, to do what they want to do while they're on your property. Same thing for employees. The easier you make as leaders for your employees to do their jobs and to accomplish what they want to accomplish, as Robert mentioned, if you go into hospitality, generally speaking, you want to serve, the easier you make it your employees to do that, the better it's going to be. So I think an effort question is important to have on your survey and an important metric to measure. But also one other thing too, it really depends, like no two properties are exactly the same. In my opinion, CX programs that are done right include questions that provide leading indicator results, right? You know that if X, Y, and Z are improved, the metrics that matter, whether it's effort or NPS or guest sat or customer sat, are going to improve as well. And all the financial metrics that matter are also going to improve. You want to identify what's important to your specific property. As an example, at one of Caesar's property back in the day, there was this truth that we operated by in slots that if you're able to respond to an outage in under 180 seconds, you had a great shot at getting a top box result on your survey, right? And so in that particular instance, at least in the short term, if not the long term, I would make that question specific or a metric specific to the wait time in slots, something that I would report up to the executive team. Does that make sense?
Yeah, crystal clear. This next question was for me, which I used the word signals. So somebody was asking for a little clarification on what signals are. Historically, most organizations sent out a survey or had a comment card. We call that a signal of customer sentiment. But there are a lot of other signals that we as CX leaders can leverage. One of the most important ones is travel and review sites like TripAdvisor, OpenTable, websites like that, where customers are actively leaving feedback. The biggest one would arguably be your contact center. People still call in and talk to an agent, and being able to listen, transcribe, and understand the tones, inflections, the words, the phrases that they're using is a huge opportunity for CX leaders to unlock a good data. That's a little bit clarification on when I use the word signal. We like to talk about all the different signals that we as CX leaders can use to better understand what our customers are actually talking about and what they want from our organization. All right, so let me pull my list back up here. How do I prioritize CX initiatives when the budget is flat or shrinking?
Yeah. So what I would say is that it's not about doing more. It's about being smarter with what you do. Figuring out where you have the trifecta. You look at your employee survey. What is the big pain point for employees in operations? Where do you have guest sentiment and it overlaps with that? And then the third one is where can I make a financial impact? Those three is what you want to look at. It doesn't cost you anything to use the additional tools likely already embedded into your survey platforms. There are likely ways in your platform, I don't know who asked this and what they're using, but find someone who can help you walk through how you can find that trifecta, because that data analytics likely exists in the platform that you're using today, and that won't cost you extra to be able to use those tools to find your project. All of the work at the client site that I described, all that work happened in an environment where they were very cost sensitive, and the project more than paid for itself. Those are my two takeaways for you: is use the tools you have. Probably there's elements of it that you could dig into and use more. And then secondarily, look for the trifecta.
Awesome.
A really quick add on to that, if I may, Robert. What I've noticed is if the person holding the purse strings is your VP of finance or your CFO, it's helpful to conduct or to put together a discounted cash flow analysis showing the return on the investment or on that line item in your budget to show that compared to anything else, it's going to yield better returns. It's quite effective.
We're running short on time, so let me put that up on the screen while we wrap up with kind of one last thought. We'd love for you to connect with us. So if you go ahead and scan that QR code, what it'll do is it'll take you to our website where you can access a link to all of our LinkedIn's or the ability to send us a text message or email. We're here to support you. We do this because we absolutely love the CX practice. Maybe a closing thought. If each one of you want to take maybe 30 seconds, what's your one big piece of advice for CX leaders in the webinar today?
I'll start. My biggest advice is if you're a CX leader who's not completely plugged into your operations, invest time in knowing your operators and knowing the details of the operation. Effective change can't happen just by knowing the data. It knows knowing the data and understanding the details of the operation. So that would be my ask if you're a CX leader on the call today.
A lot of CX programs I've come across, unfortunately, are nothing more than slogans on a wall. Reports are sent out every single week and nothing's ever done with them. So I think one of the most important takeaways is you should always push. If you don't have a dedicated CX leader at your property, you can take it upon yourself to take the insights learned and turn it into action. Meet with the operators, like Ben mentioned, get to know them as people, get to know what their needs are, lead them into action from those insights. Another thing too is, to quote Maya Angelou, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they're never going to forget how you made them feel. And I think you can take a lot from that and apply it into the worlds of CX and EX and what you do to design the programs that you execute.
Wonderful. Thank you both. We didn't spend a lot of time focusing on it on today's phone call, but something that I've seen make a big impact and drive sustained revenue growth is what we like to call closing the loop. So if a customer or guest fills out a survey or goes online to read a review, the quicker you can say, thank you for the feedback, I heard you, here's what we're going to do, that creates loyalty. And that's real. Internally, we try to shoot for under 12 hours from the time somebody leaves feedback to the time we respond to them. That's really what we guide as leading in the industry. Many other sources would say to try to do it within 24 hours, but we do believe that guest expectations are evolving. You need to do it quickly. So being able to do that, there's a lot of tools, especially AI, can help streamline that. Most of our clients still read the responses before the AI engine actually sends the response out, but nonetheless, it's helped streamline that tremendously. So closing the loop, absolutely critical. It creates loyalty, and you also have a chance to learn. The folks we work with actually set up almost like a campaign. So if the feedback isn't action within so many hours, it gets escalated to another leader. And if it's not action, then it gets escalated to another leader. And we give our clients the visibility to how quickly these items are being actioned. And also, we help them prioritize it. You want to respond to your best customers typically first. If I could leave you with one piece of feedback, it'd be make sure to close the loop with your customers, especially if they're focused enough to give you their time and their feedback. All right, we run short on time. Thank you all for joining us. Ben and Radley, I learned a lot from both of you. Appreciate the time today. Talk to you all soon.